Chapter 46. 2 years later, Rain's car halted in front of the huge, 3-story, 5-star restaurant that had her family name on it. The sun was just about setting, casting its orangish hue against the magnificent building she'd taken pride in for the last 2 years. She'd had something to take care of at the Wallace second branch in Mirage Mesa, which was still under construction, and now she wanted to see Ethan, her son, before his nanny put him to bed for a nap after his daily outing at the park. He would be 2 years old in a month, full of energy and cheerfulness, and he loved adventures. Last week, on a beautiful afternoon, Rain had taken him to a larger park they visited on weekends, and she'd gotten some wonderful photographs of him sailing his boat in the big fountain with sunlit trees in the background. 4 times that day, people had stopped to remark on how beautiful he was, which was a normal occurrence for any outing with Ethan. He was the image of his father, with Liam Thompson's thick black hair and dark-lashed, huge orbs. He even had his slow smile and effortless charm. He was also showing signs of having inherited Liam's magnetism with females. With one of his quick, flashing grins, Ethan could conquer the hearts of women, from old ladies to teenagers to an adorable 2-year-old girl in their apartment building. The only genetic contribution from her that Rain could see was that Ethan's hair was slightly curly, although not as curly as hers. He was tall for his age, surprisingly well coordinated, and growing up so fast that, at times, Rain wished she could reach out and stop the clock from ticking away the minutes and days of his childhood. He was extremely bright, and, not surprisingly, he was also starting to pick up and repeat words and phrases from the several languages he heard being spoken by the workers at the restaurant and the customers. His most recently acquired phrase, a colorful Italian curse, had Rain thinking he needed to stay upstairs with his nanny, in a room she'd expanded and renovated so she could keep him near her all the time at the restaurant. She parked her car in the driveway and got out. Picking up her purse, Rain locked the car and elegantly walked up to the restaurant entrance. The restaurant had a stylish exterior with large glass windows that showcased the elegant interior. The entrance was framed by tall, dark wooden doors with gold handles, and the name of the restaurant was displayed in elegant, cursive lettering above. Outside, there were a few tables with comfortable chairs, surrounded by neatly trimmed plants. Soft, warm lights illuminated the entrance, giving the place a welcoming and sophisticated look that always made Rain feel at home. However, as she reached for the handle, she realized something was amiss. The restaurant seemed unusually quiet with nobody around, not even the doorman or the valet. Puzzled, Rain pushed the heavy front door, walked inside, and saw absolutely no one. The dining rooms were set up for dinner. Everything looked perfect, except no one was there, not the waiters, not a single customer, security guard, or attendant. Puzzled and vaguely uneasy, Rain quickened her pace toward the first kitchen downstairs, rushed through the swinging doors, and stopped short as a smiling army of loyal employees burst into cheers and applause. At the front of the crowd, her son's nanny was holding Ethan, and he was clapping and grinning as well. Next to Ethan were 2 waiters holding a sign that read, "Congratulations Miss Wallace for winning the award of Restaurateur of the Year." Rain confusedly walked forward, scooped Ethan out of his nanny's arms, and looked around at the sea of smiling faces. "What's going on?" she asked. The restaurant manager grinned at his assistant and then at the rest of the staff. "She hasn't seen it yet," he said, and everyone burst out laughing. "Seen what?" Rain said. Without a word, the manager retrieved an iPad from a staff member behind him and lifted it up so Rain could see what was on it. Rain's eyes widened as she saw her name at the top of the list of restaurant owners in the country. She read through the congratulatory messages and the award given to her for being the best in the country. She'd not expected to get all this attention over the past 2 years, but everything had seemed to be working in her favor. She read through the article that had several pictures used in prior stories about the Wallace restaurants, including one of Rain with the governor and one of her meeting with the country's top chef, with Ethan beside her on his high chair. The caption below that one read, "Rain Wallace runs her restaurant while son Ethan looks on and learns from his high chair." Rain scanned the article, then she looked around at her staff and told them exactly who she felt deserved the credit for her award. "I can't thank all of you enough for this," she said simply. The manager glanced at his watch, then at everyone else. "We're opening in 2 minutes, he warned them, and patted Rain's shoulder as he walked out. "You're the best," he said. Rain gave Ethan a hug. "Did you hear that, Ethan? Mr. Shin says we're the best." In response, Ethan planted a kiss on her cheek and said, Nanny and I go to the playground, Mommy. Rain let him slide to the floor, and he took his nanny's hand, the middle-aged woman who'd positively doted on him since the day he was born. No flirting with Elizabeth, Rain teased, looking from the little boy to his devoted nanny. Far away in downtown Zen, inside a middle-class apartment building with run-down windows and doors, a man was seen sitting alone in a dark room with a burning cigarette between his fingers and a magazine in his other hand. He held it to his face, reading it as his expression slowly turned dark. Slowly and angrily, his fingers tightened around the magazine about Rain's least successful story until it crumbled, and he flung it onto the table next to him. His sister was like a pain in the neck, and he couldn't get rid of her because she was his flesh and blood. She was his sister, but whenever he tried to reach out to her, she blocked him out like some kind of stranger. She was always on the front of magazines, and everyone was talking about her success and how intelligent her son was. According to the article before this one, the mayor and the president were her customers. For weeks after the article appeared, Jason had been trying to get to her, but he couldn't get hold of her personal number or even step foot into the restaurant that was rightfully his as the heir of the Wallace family. Today's article raved about her, as all the other stories had done, but today's article also included a nice big photograph of Thompson's little bastard and her in the kitchen at Wallace. It was the second time he'd seen that picture, the second time he'd had to look at it. The little son of a bitch looked so much like his father that it was uncanny, and that infuriated him even more. He hated Liam Thompson, and this little bastard having his face made him want to vent his anger on him. As Jason was raging over his loss, the door to his apartment opened. He didn't move an inch from his sitting position as he knew who had come in. "What's up, Jason? Thanks for making time for me today," said Milo Thompson. Tossing his cigarette down in the ashtray, Jason reached out and shook Milo's hand. At 16, Milo Thompson was a good-looking kid, a little stocky, as his father had been, but not as pleasant to be around. The psychiatrists and the court had both agreed, with a little help from the excellent defense lawyers his mother had arranged, that his ADHD medication had caused Milo's psychotic break the day he shot his father. That didn't require a big stretch of the imagination, since there'd been mounting evidence that the medication could cause psychotic episodes in some people. A year of confinement in a psychiatric hospital, plus ongoing therapy during his 3-year probation period, had supposedly helped him resolve conflicts and learn impulse control. "How's your new girlfriend?" Jason asked, trying to remember what Milo had said her name was during his last visit to his apartment when they'd first met in person after years of talking on the internet. "Jessie's fine. Where did you meet her?" "In group therapy. You probably know her parents, the Emmons?" Jason didn't know them, and he didn't care about them, so he shook his head and ended the small talk. "You said you wanted to meet me urgently. What's it about?" Jason asked, but he already had a good idea why Milo was there. After his release, Milo's share in the Thompsons' wealth had been held in trust until he was 33, with the stipulation that he forfeited it if he was convicted of any felony in the meantime. However, almost a quarter and a half of the Thompsons' share was in Liam's name, and Liam had already given the quarter away to charity to build an orphanage for homeless children. "I want you to help me find a way to get back my wealth before I turn old. Liam is going to start building a fucking charity house with my money, and I want to stop him before it's too late. My father is dead, and there is no one to stop him from using my money. I should be living in wealth with my own car. Instead, I'm supposed to wait around until I'm 33 to get a little bit of what I should have had, and I'm not going to fucking do it. I get off probation in another year and a half, and I want my money, and I want my own life. Milo, we've already had this conversation. As I told you, there's nothing I can help with on that. Take a good look at me. Do I seem like a man who can help you fight Liam for your wealth?" Milo looked him over from head to toe. Jason was wearing faded jeans and a plain blue t-shirt. His hair was long and unkempt, and his skin looked so tanned he'd lost his charm. Looking at him, Milo scoffed. "You sure look fucked up by life, buddy." Jason glared at the boy. If he wasn't his pawn, he would have thrown the little psychopath from the top of his balcony for his sharp tongue. "I can't help you with this. Go wait until you're 33 before you get your wealth," Jason said, leaning back in his chair and closing his eyes. Milo lost it. "You don't understand. I hate that son of a bitch, Liam. I hate him so much I can't stand it." "Believe me, I know how you feel," Jason remarked grimly. Milo looked contemptuous of that possibility, so Jason reached out and shoved the magazine in front of him. "Do you see that picture?" That is my sister. Liam Thompson got her pregnant. See that kid? That's his kid. Milo studied the boy in the photograph, and then he said in a chilling voice, "So, this makes him what, my cousin? Which means I'd have to share my wealth with this little fucker." Chapter 47. Rain's apartment was across her restaurant, and it was a stylish, modern space with large windows letting in plenty of light. The living room was tastefully decorated with soft, neutral colors and cozy furniture. Rain moved swiftly through the room, picking up her handbag and car keys from the sleek coffee table. She turned to her son, Ethan, and kissed his chubby cheek. "Mommy, see you later," Ethan said, hugging her neck and planting a kiss on her cheek. Rain smiled at his words. "I'll see you later, sweetheart." She glanced at his nanny. "Elizabeth, please bring Ethan over to the restaurant after his outing in the park." "I will, Miss Wallace," Elizabeth replied warmly. Rain had a lot to get done at the restaurant and needed to leave early. Her son also liked his day at the park, so she'd arranged for her driver to take him there with his nanny while she headed to work to get things done before he returned. She kissed Ethan's chubby cheek again and handed him over to Elizabeth. Turning to leave, she paused at the door, waving at Ethan, who was grinning and waving back excitedly from Elizabeth's arms. "I love you, Mommy," he called out in his baby voice. "I love you too, darling." She blew him a kiss, and his grin grew wider, his eyes glimmering brighter. Those eyes would forever remind her of a certain someone, whom she decided to put in the back of her memories and forget. Rain walked out of the apartment, her heart swelling with pride and love for her son, the only family she had now. She considered her brother dead and her mom, who was with her new family in Mirage Mesa, non-existent. Ethan Wallace was her only love and life. She couldn't imagine a life without him now, her charming little prince. As Rain walked away from the apartment hallway, a young woman emerged from the apartment next door. She looked like a teenager with blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail and a black choker around her neck. Her dress was stark black with dark lipstick on her lips, and she held a flashy green balloon in her hand. She rang the bell to the Wallace apartment. Elizabeth, holding Ethan, opened the door. Ethan laughed in excitement at the sight of his next-door friend. "Good morning, Elizabeth," the girl greeted with a bright, innocent smile. Elizabeth smiled, stepping back to welcome her inside. "Good morning, Jessie. How have you been?" "I'm good. Just came here to say hi to Ethan," said the girl. Jessie, who worked part-time as a babysitter next door, was Ethan's best friend. The moment she walked in, Ethan wiggled down from Elizabeth's arms and clambered to the floor. "Jessie," he exclaimed, reaching for the balloon she was holding. "Balloon for me, give me." Jessie held out the balloon. "Look, the balloon matches your pajamas." "What color is it?" Ethan looked from the balloon to his clothes, his eyes brightening. "Color green. Just like Mommy's eyes." A slow smile graced Jessie's face. "Good boy. Now, if you can catch the balloon, it's all yours." As she spoke those words, she opened the door to the apartment. Before Elizabeth could react, a man in a mask walked in, wielding an iron bat. He smashed it against Elizabeth's head, and the world immediately began to fade. Before everything went black, she heard Jessie yelling, "Be careful with the boy. You promised not to hurt anyone." In her dimming consciousness, Elizabeth felt a piece of paper being slipped into her dress pocket. The door to the apartment slammed shut, and the last thing she heard was Ethan's cries dying down in the background. Hours later, after Rain arrived at the restaurant, she did what was needed and then went up to her office to wait for her son's and Elizabeth's arrival. However, even after a few more hours passed, there was no sign of them. Rain thought perhaps Ethan was keeping his nanny from leaving the park as usual and relaxed a bit. However, she reached for her phone to call the nanny when she heard a knock on her office door. Believing it to be one of the workers or her assistant, she called them in while dialing the nanny's number, but stopped mid-action of taking the phone to her ear at the sight of 4 men in detective uniforms who walked into her office. "Mrs. Wallace, I'm Detective Parker, and this is my assistant, Ivan." Rain took one look at the detectives' grave faces, and an awakening terror, unlike anything she had ever known, sent her slowly to her feet. "My son," she said, automatically naming the most terrifying reason of all for their visit. "Where's Ethan? What's happened? Where's Elizabeth?" "Ethan was kidnapped from your apartment building a few hours ago." "Oh, my God. No, please," she cried. "Not Ethan. Please, not my son." "Where's Elizabeth?" Rain asked in tones of rising hysteria. "Is she with Ethan?" He won't be as scared if. The nanny was knocked unconscious by the kidnappers, Detective Parker said, but she regained consciousness a few hours later and managed to attract notice and get help. She was taken by an ambulance to the city hospital with a suspected skull fracture. However, she was able to give us a pretty detailed description of a young woman who we think was part of the plot. In her mind, Rain was screaming in tormented fear, but all she could do was stand there with her knees knocking together and her body trembling so violently that she wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold herself still. Detective Parker continued in a calm, reassuring voice. We stand an excellent chance of getting Ethan back safely, but we need to move very quickly now, and we need your help. Rain nodded jerkily, her teeth chattering. What? She asked. What do you need? We're going to issue a crimson alert right away, Detective Parker said urgently. The only way to find the child quickly was by announcing a crimson alert, a system used to notify the public about missing or kidnapped children. The alert would be broadcast on every social network, television, radio, and social media, as well as sent directly to citizens' devices. We need a recent picture of Ethan, a description of his clothing, his age, weight, and height, Parker continued. Rain picked up a framed picture of Ethan from her desk, started to hand it to Detective Parker, then pulled it back, clutching it to her heart and wrapping her arms around it. My baby, she whispered brokenly. My baby. I'll get his pictures from upstairs, Rain's assistant volunteered, already on the way at a run. Please try to stay calm for the next few minutes so we can get the alert out, Parker said. We need your son's height and weight. Rain made a valiant effort to comply and turned to her phone to dial Ethan's pediatrician's number. Ethan just went to the pediatrician for his checkup yesterday, she babbled. He'll know Ethan's height and weight exactly. What was he wearing? Detective Parker's assistant asked from behind her, his notebook and pencil poised. Rain glanced over her shoulder. The assistant was younger than Parker and not quite as good at pretending everything was going to be fine. Ethan was wearing green pajamas. An image of Ethan grinning at her in his pajamas just a little while ago broke down her fragile barrier of control, and she began crying while she tried to find the pediatrician's number on her phone. I can't. I'll get it for you, Rain, one of her workers volunteered, squeezing past the detectives and coming around her desk. What name am I looking for? When Rain told him, he found the phone number, made the call for her, and explained the situation to the receptionist who answered. 2 minutes later, he hung up and gave the detectives the details. Miss Wallace, stay calm, Parker said, feeling sympathy for the distraught woman. From the pictures he had seen years ago, he knew she had once had an affair with Liam Thompson. Given the boy's age and circumstances, it was probable that Liam was Ethan's father. Parker, who had a son himself, couldn't imagine what it would be like if his child went missing. This is going to be okay. You've got the best detectives in the country on the case, and a task force is already being organized, Will assured. Parker's assistant, Ivan, paused in the doorway, talking on his phone. When he hung up, he looked at Will and said with what sounded like relief, There's a ransom note. The paramedics found it stuffed down the front of Elizabeth's dress. The kidnappers said they'll make contact here at 9 o'clock tonight with instructions of how to deliver the money. Rain sank onto a sofa, letting the conversation swirl around her, dimly aware that word had spread downstairs and the doorway was filling up with worried faces of her workers. Good, Will said. Good? Rain repeated numbly, but hopefully, trying to understand what was good about the situation where her son has been kidnapped. Kidnapping for ransom has a much better outcome than other types of child abduction, Will told her, and looked back at his assistant. Anything significant about the ransom note? Nothing that's apparent. All I know right now is that it's printed from a computer on white paper. He looked at another detective in the room and said, Go ahead and get the wheels in motion for a crimson alert. To Rain's assistant, he said, Please give the most recent photograph of Ethan to the detective. Rain's assistant handed it over, rubbed her hands on the sides of her skirt, and whirled on her heel, heading for the door. I'll make some coffee for everyone. Good idea, Will said, then he exchanged a speaking glance with Ivan, who followed her and stopped her near the entrance. Sitting on the sofa, Rain watched her assistant nod in reply to whatever Ivan said, then she asked him a question, and his answer made her cover her mouth as if she was stifling a cry. What's wrong? Rain cried, half rising from the sofa as her assistant headed for Ethan's playroom in her office. Parker put his hand on her arm and drew her back down. We need to get a sample of Ethan's DNA from his hairbrush or toothbrush. Why? Rain demanded, unable to think as clearly as her assistant had. After the crimson alert goes out, we'll start getting calls from all over the country that children matching Ethan's description have turned up. We can avoid false alarms if we have Ethan's DNA to send to the authorities for a match." In her heart, Rain knew there was some other reason, other than healthy children turning up and needing to be ruled out, for the police to want a sample of Ethan's DNA, but her brain refused to follow that terrifying path. Parker's next words distracted her from all of that. The kidnapper's ransom demand is for $1 billion in cash, ready to be handed over at 10 o'clock tonight. Gaping at him in disbelief, Rain said, $1 billion? But I don't have that kind of money. I could raise a few $1,000,000 if they'll give me a little time to arrange for loans, and the kidnappers aren't going to give you that time. Nausea welled up in Rain's throat, and she got up to make a dash for the bathroom. Chapter 48. Will Parker watched Rain walk back to the sofa a few minutes later, her face the color of chalk, her arms wrapped around her stomach again. In the middle of the room, she paused and looked around with tears filling her eyes. "I keep expecting Ethan to dash out of his playroom," she whispered, looking at Parker, her green eyes swimming with tears. "I want my baby. I want to see him smile at me. You have to promise me you'll get him back unharmed. Please, promise me you will. Let's talk about the ransom money first." "I don't have that much money," she cried. "Weren't you listening to me? I can't raise $1 billion within hours. I'm not sure I can raise $100 million, but I'll start trying." Suddenly, she launched into feverish haste, heading for her phone on the table beside the sofa. "I'll call my banker." "No, you won't," Parker said shortly. "You'll call Ethan's father." She wrinkled her forehead as if she didn't know what he was talking about. "What? Are you certain Liam Thompson is Ethan's father?" Will asked to confirm his suspicion about the boy's father. "I am certain." Her mouth dropped open, and she glared at him through her tears as she realized he'd made her slip and admitted Liam as Ethan's father, but then she didn't care anymore and said, "Of course I'm certain." "Then get him on the phone." Rain felt as if her heart were breaking and her mind were splintering. "Do you think for 1 minute that if I knew how to reach him, and if he actually picked up my call, that he would believe me or come up with the money? Do you have any other choices?" "That's not a choice. That's not even something I want to consider. I repeat, do you have any other hope of raising the ransom money, Miss Wallace?" Rain stared at him, frozen in a trance of stark terror, anguish, and helplessness. Slowly, the realization began to penetrate that she could take action now, and that any action, no matter how futile, was a way of doing something to help keep Ethan safe. In the space of seconds, her realization became resolve, and she threw herself into desperate action. Crossing swiftly to the sofa, she picked up the phone, then she stopped and looked at Will Parker. "I have no idea how to reach him. Do you? I have various addresses and phone numbers for him, but it could take hours to track him down. He has close friends here in the country, Neil Weiner and James Wilbert. Neil Weiner may be able to point us in the right direction." Rain bit her lip as she decided to dial Mia's number to ask her if she knew how to contact Liam, but to her dismay, Mia's phone was switched off, and she suddenly remembered that Mia was out of the country for some important business trip with her team at the company, and judging from the time, she might be on set by now. Even though they were best of friends, Rain had never mentioned to Mia that Liam was the father of her son, all because she didn't want the words to get to Neil and then get to Liam. She wanted to keep Ethan for herself, and she'd lied to her friend that Max was the father of her son. Feeling even more anxious at the thought of speaking to Neil directly now that Mia was unavailable, Rain began to dial the number of his secretary she'd taken from Will Parker. When it began ringing, she handed the phone to the detective. "I'll talk to him, but you'll need to get him to take my call first." With a puzzled look, the detective took the phone from her hand, and Rain said, "The last time I saw Liam," she explained in answer to his puzzled look, "Neil was there, and he heard the things his friend accused me of being. Liam accused me of being an immoral bitch. When Neil walked away, he looked at me as if I'd just become invisible. Since then, he treated me like a nobody in his world. Believe me, from what I know of Neil, he wouldn't want to give even a minute of his day to hear what I have to say now. Don't worry, I'll get him to take your call. There's one more thing," he added after he asked the receptionist to connect him to Neil Weiner's office. "Liam is going to want some form of proof that Ethan is his before he forks over $1 billion. I have Liam's DNA on record, and we'll have Ethan's DNA in a few hours. If you will guarantee me that there is no way Ethan is anyone else's child, I'll vouch for a DNA match now, on this phone call. If it turns out you're wrong, I'll retract my statement before Liam hands over the money and tell him there was a mistake. There's no mistake. He nodded, then spoke into the phone. This is Will Parker, he told Neil Wayner's secretary. Is Neil in? This is an emergency. Rain unconsciously held her breath while the seconds ticked by, and she thought of Ethan out there somewhere with strangers. Mr. Wayner, Will said suddenly into the phone. I'm with Rain Wallace. Her little boy was kidnapped this morning. You'll hear a crimson alert any minute now if you turn on a radio or television. Rain needs to talk to you. Before she does that, I want you to know that the DNA evidence will back up what she's going to tell you. Here's Rain, he finished. Rain stood up as she took the phone from him with trembling hands. Mr. Wayner, she said formally and firmly as she knew he no longer considered her a friend of his, Liam Thompson is Ethan's father. Rain paused, waiting for some reaction, and when there was none, she continued to speak. The kidnappers are demanding $1 billion by 10 o'clock tonight. I can't even come close to paying that much money. Again Rain paused, and again there was no reaction, so she drew an unsteady breath and said shakily, Would you please ask Liam to call me? I'll give you my personal phone number. Tell him I'll sign over the restaurant to him in return, and I'll find some way to pay him back the rest. Tears constricted her throat, and Rain grasped the phone harder. Please, Neil, you have to find Liam and tell him. Ethan isn't even 2 yet and he's out there somewhere with. She broke off, swallowed, and got herself under control. Tell Liam that Will Parker will show him proof that Ethan's DNA matches the DNA in Liam's file at the detective office. Here's my phone number at the restaurant. But I'll be heading home in a few minutes, Rain added quickly so that Neil Wayner wouldn't think she was working as usual while her son was missing. Finally, the silent man on the other end of the phone spoke. I will call him, he said, and I'll give him your message. Thank you, Rain said weakly. She'd started to take the phone from her ear when he added, I'm very sorry about your son. That snapped Rain from pleading to ire. Ethan isn't just my son, he is also Liam's son. I'll remind Liam of that, he said to her surprise. Chapter 49. The headquarters of Thompson Enterprises stood as a gleaming monument to modern architecture in the heart of the city. The building's sleek, mirrored facade reflected the bustling streets below, creating a dynamic interplay of light and movement. Rising 50 stories high, the structure was composed of glass and steel, its sharp lines and elegant curves exuding an air of sophistication. Inside the building, 2 women could be seen standing near their desks, organizing files and chatting quietly. The spacious office was filled with the low hum of activity, but their conversation was far more interesting. He never loses his temper, nor does he curse, said one of the 2 women, who happened to be Liam Thompson's secretary. I heard he is the most polite wealthy man anyone has ever seen, remarked the other, who was new to the company. Yes, for the past 2 years I've worked in his company, I can vouch for that. I have never worked for a man as good-natured and calm as him. He rarely smiles or laughs, nor does he do anything other than work, but he is what we call a silent man with authority. You will. Just then, the door to their boss's office opened, and Liam Thompson strode through, his long legs carrying him swiftly across the polished marble floor. He wore a dark blue suit that fit him perfectly, accentuating his broad shoulders and slim waist. His dark hair was immaculately styled, and his chiseled jawline was clean-shaven. His piercing dark eyes, framed by dark brows, scanned the room briefly before he continued toward his destination. Trailing closely behind him was his assistant, always attentive and ready with a tablet in hand. Liam nodded briefly at his 2 female secretaries, who quickly bowed slightly in greeting. Good afternoon, Mr. Thompson, they chorused, their voices harmonizing in a well-practiced tone. Good afternoon, Liam replied, his deep voice resonating through the air as he passed by. Once he and his assistant had entered the conference room, closing the door behind them, the new secretary let out a soft sigh and continued their conversation from where they'd stopped. I do have one concern, she admitted half seriously. How long does it take before one stops noticing how incredibly handsome he is? The other laughed at her candor. When you realize he does not play around with his employees, ever, you'll relax and forget his looks. In 2 or 3 years, she joked. Does he have a lot of girlfriends? Since the new secretary would be involved in facets of his personal life, such as arranging for theater tickets, making dinner reservations, and dealing with everything pertaining to his penthouse apartment, she decided to talk about his personal affairs with her. Yes, he is currently dating Mallory Malachi, also known as In the entertainment industry. The secretary's eyes widened at the mention of the acclaimed Hollywood actress who was known for her magnificent acting. "What's like? I've never seen her in person. She's a little on the arrogant side, but she's so gorgeous and so talented. Who can blame her?" Was that a tactful way of saying she's a conceited snob? Was I that obvious? No, you were. Their gossip was cut short by the telephone on the desk that gave out a low, distinctive double ring. "That's Mr. Thompson's private line. He answers it himself if he's in his office, but if he isn't, we always answer it," she explained as she picked up the receiver. "Mr. Thompson's office," she said. Then she listened a moment and replied in a friendly tone, "Yes, he's here, Mr. Galvera, but he's in the midst of a conference meeting. He should be finished very soon though," and the man on the phone evidently interrupted her because she stopped talking, listened for a second, and then said, "Yes, of course. I'll go to him right away." She put the call on hold and stood up while speaking to her colleague. "Mr. Galvera is on the phone and wants me to interrupt the conference meeting because Mr. Thompson isn't picking up his personal phone. He said it's urgent. Let's go together." The two secretaries entered the meeting room where businessmen were seated around a long conference table, listening to a young presenter. The moment they entered, all heads turned to them. One of the men frowned in displeasure at the interruption. "Are you blind? Can't you see a meeting is going on?" he snapped. Then he turned to Liam. "Is this how you train your workers, to always interrupt?" Liam, already fed up with the meeting, especially with this particular businessman who had been trying to prove he knew better than everyone, ignored him and turned politely to his secretary. "What's the matter?" She took a deep breath and replied, "Mr. Galvera is on the call, sir. He said it's urgent." Hearing that Neil was on the call, Liam immediately stood up from his chair. "Carry on without me," he instructed the room. He turned to his assistant, "Listen and fill me in on whatever they decide later." The same man was about to speak again, but Liam ignored him and walked out of the conference room, wondering what Neil's call was all about. Did he have one of those meaningless little arguments with his wife and couldn't find a way to apologize and needed Liam's help in figuring out the best gift for her again? That could be the only thing urgent to Neil enough to make him want Liam immediately. But then, for the first time, he was thankful for the distraction because the meeting was a boring one that was draining his energy anyway, he thought as he stepped back into his office to answer the call. "I told you, Nellie, Mr. Thompson is the kindest, nicest man on earth. Didn't you see how he didn't lose his cool when we interrupted him? I'm definitely going to like this new job of mine," the new secretary beamed. Barely able to say goodbye to Neil, Liam slammed his phone against the wall. "Son of a bitch," he cursed savagely. "Son of a bitch." Picking up the decorative crystal ball that was a gift to him from his girlfriend, Liam angrily squeezed it in his hand, hard enough to crush it, had it been made of mere stone. He was so furious that his mind refused to grasp everything he'd just been told, and he had to keep repeating it to himself in his mind. Rain Wallace had a son who'd been kidnapped, and Will Parker had DNA proof that Liam was the little boy's father. Liam was the father of Rain Wallace's son, and she'd never had the decency to let him know he had a child. She'd intended to raise his son exactly as Liam himself had been raised, without any knowledge of his biological father until he was 7, after he'd suffered and watched his mother die without being able to help her. Kidnappers had grabbed Liam's son this morning in Rain's apartment and were holding him for ransom. As that last piece of knowledge fully sank in, his seething anger escalated to rage, and he hurled the crystal ball across the room with all the force of his fury behind it. At exactly the same moment, Nellie, his secretary, swung the door open and walked into his office with the new secretary, Anne. Anne ducked and stifled a scream, but Nellie froze in astonishment as the 10-pound crystal ball streaked past her, struck the wall, crashed onto the slate floor, and exploded in a loud blast of shattering glass. Anne hastily retreated several steps into the safety of her office, but after a moment of horrified paralysis, Nellie got her expression under control and walked forward toward his desk. Outwardly composed, she began picking her way gingerly across the shattered crystal on the floor, but she was inwardly shaken by his first-time display of rage and violent wrath and helplessly anxious by the sound of glass crunching beneath her feet. She was dying to ask what had caused him to make this mess, but his forbidding expression made her fear that any pointed reference to the situation might easily cause another eruption of temper from him. Trying to be calm, thoughtful, and helpful, Nellie inquired cautiously, "Is something wrong, Mr. Thompson?" "Do I fucking look like something is right?" he retorted as he surged to his feet, yanked his briefcase off the credenza behind him, and began shoving papers from the top of his desk into it. Embarrassed by her idiotic choice of words, Nellie refrained from commenting and instead bent down to pick up a dismembered crystal part lying at the edge of the thick wool carpet that his desk sat on. Intending to rattle off a list of instructions, Liam glanced in her direction, saw what she was doing, and paused just long enough to say with curt courtesy, "Don't touch that, you'll cut yourself. Call maintenance later and have them clean up the glass. I'm leaving for Zen," he continued, switching swiftly to the matters at hand. "Call my driver and tell him to pick me up downstairs, and then call my pilots and tell them to have the plane fueled up and ready to fly as soon as I get to the hangar. Next, call my attorney's office in Zen and tell them to have the lawyers call me within 30 minutes, no matter where they are or what they're doing." He paused for a breath, and Nellie interjected quickly, "Your plane's having maintenance work done. It can't fly until tomorrow at the earliest. Then get me 2 tickets on the next flight to Zen. If I can't get first class, is coach all right? Get whatever you can, just get me on the next flight," Liam said shortly. "If that isn't possible, try to charter a plane. When you've handled all that, call my housekeeper and tell her to pack my clothes and then make sure they're put on a plane to Zen later today. Do you want to stay at?" Liam yanked open the bottom drawer of his desk to pull out more files and interrupted her in mid-question, but he managed to temper his tone. "First, take care of the phone calls I just asked you to make, and then call me in the car with any other questions you need answered." As she nodded and hurried away, he put the remaining files into his briefcase. Then he opened the center desk drawer and pulled out the slim folding case containing his PDA, his passport, and the other items he automatically took with him on trips. He tossed that case on top of the files, slammed the briefcase closed, and reached to open another drawer where he pulled out a brand new phone with all of his previous information on it already. When the phone turned on, he immediately made a call to his bank in Paris to prepare the sum of $1 billion for him within an hour. Chapter 50. "It's going to be tight," Dante, Liam's driver and childhood friend, replied. "Traffic is heavy, and if there's a long line at airport security, we're in trouble." "Then make sure we're there in time to get through security," Liam said sharply, but not completely unreasonably. Behind the steering wheel, Dante possessed the superb reflexes and daring courage of a test pilot, and, when necessary, the aggressive stealth of an assassin. At this moment, he was already speeding as if he were being chased by the hounds of hell. Satisfied that Dante would do whatever needed to be done to get him to the airport before it was too late, Liam resumed his conversation on the phone with his secretary. "Have you prepared everything I asked you to?" "Yes. Do you want me to have a car and driver waiting for you when you land in Zen as well?" "No. Neil is sending his chauffeur to get us. You'll need to call him and give him our flight information," he told her. "I'll take care of it. What about hotel accommodations? Do you want to stay at your usual hotel?" "No. Ask James to recommend a hotel that's close to Rain Wallace's restaurant, and get me reservations at whatever hotel he suggests. I'll call you later to find out where it is," he added. Then he ended the call and frowned at his watch, waiting impatiently for his attorneys to call him. Liam was still frowning when Dante's amused inquiry made him lift his head. "Who is Rain Wallace?" he demanded ill-manneredly, "and why are you busting your ass to get to her restaurant? What is she, a goddess? Or just one hell of a cook?" Normally, anyone who tried to pry too deeply into Liam's personal life ended up with a severe case of frostbite, not information. But Dante was one of the few who could pry any information from him. 1 year older than Liam and half a foot shorter, Dante was one of the first people in the Thompsons' mansion who were nice to him when he was brought from China at 7. Back then, Dante was the son of the Thompson family's chauffeur who also happened to be Chinese. When Liam arrived, not knowing how to speak any language other than Mandarin, Dante and his 2 stepsisters helped him cope and adjust to everything around him. Liam had trusted Dante the day he was bullied by a bunch of older kids who had come to attend a banquet at the Thompsons' mansion but ended up spotting him in the corner and finding amusement in bullying him, calling him, "Hey, little Jackie Chan, show us some kung fu moves, will you?" while hitting him on the back of his head and nudging him forward to fight them. However, 10-year-old Dante had walked in like a hero and fought them to protect him. After he'd fought all the older boys, he turned to the scared Liam and patted his shoulder. "Don't worry, little Chan. I will be your Jackie from now on." Since then, Dante had been Liam's hero and his self-appointed protector, the big brother, who let Liam tag along with him everywhere while threatening the older boys with dire physical retribution should they dare give Liam any trouble. Unfortunately for Dante, who loved to fight, most of the elite kids in their high-class circle knew when to back off. That pretty much eliminated the need for Dante to fight on Liam's behalf, as did the fact that by the time Liam was 8.5, he was nearly as tall as Dante and becoming almost as cocky. As a result, on Liam's 9th birthday, Dante announced his decision to promote Liam from the rank of Little Chan to the high rank of Best Friend. It was a promotion of which Liam was extraordinarily proud, and he applied himself diligently to learning every martial arts move that Dante taught him, most of which Dante was either inventing or learning himself. When Liam left for the military, his focus switched to military matters and his studies, but Dante pursued his own goal with single-minded dedication, eventually fighting his way around the globe, winning championship after championship, moving up the ranks until he was universally regarded as a world-class martial arts contender. He chased women and squandered his winnings with the same success and determination until he took a particularly bad beating during a fight that he nearly lost his life and decided it was time for him to do something else. He had very little money saved and no job skills that weren't physical, so he contacted Liam and suggested that Liam hire him as a driver bodyguard. At Dante's request, Liam sent him to a special training course for drivers of high-profile people, where they learned advanced evasive maneuvers to avoid attacks or kidnappings on the road. Dante completed the course as one of the top drivers ever trained. Liam had earned Dante's lifelong loyalty. Liam knew Dante would do anything for him, even step in front of a truck. For those reasons, Liam met Dante's gaze in the rearview mirror and forced himself to state aloud that which he could barely accept himself. Rain Wallace's little boy was kidnapped this morning. "Oh, Lord," Dante said, sounding sickened and outraged. He had inherited his father's love for children, and although he had none of his own, he carried photographs of all his nieces and nephews and frequently sent them gifts. "How old is him?" Liam paused, calculating the total number of months that had passed since he'd seen Rain Wallace in Maranta, subtracting from that a full 9-month pregnancy. 1 year, 8 months old. I've never heard you mention the mother's name before, so I guess she's an old friend of yours, from before I started working for you? She's no friend of mine, he said coolly. The scathing distaste in Liam's voice registered on Dante, and he glanced in surprise in the rearview mirror again. Then, I guess the boy's father is a friend of yours. I'm the boy's father, Liam said, his tone terse with submerged emotions he was struggling to suppress so that he could focus on what needed to be done. What? In his shock, Dante hit the brake. Then he slammed down on the accelerator to recover lost speed and glared accusingly over his shoulder at Liam. You've got a son you've never bothered to tell me about? I didn't know he existed until half an hour ago, when Neil called to tell me he'd been kidnapped. Do you mean Wayner has known all along that you have a son, but he didn't tell you until this morning? Dante said, his outrage expressed by his contemptuous use of Neil Wayner's last name alone. No one knew anything about the boy until this morning, when his mother called Neil and gave him the facts, Liam said, staring fixedly out the side window, his patience at the breaking point as the moments ticked by without a phone call from either of the attorneys. Right now, all I know is that he's being held for a $1 billion ransom. In a well-meaning but transparent effort to soothe Liam, Dante said, maybe she's lying about you being the father because she needs someone rich to give her the money, so she can get her boy back. She's not lying about it. How can you be so sure? When the detective was investigating Alvin's death, I gave them a sample of my DNA. This morning, the detective assured Neil that he can provide DNA proof that I'm the father. As he spoke, he stared at the silent phone, his jaw clenched with impatience, and abruptly decided he'd waited long enough for his attorneys to return his call. He aggressively tapped on the phone just as the screen lit up with an incoming call, and his attorney's name, Ellison, appeared. Liam, what's happening? Ellison asked, sounding simultaneously concerned, rushed, and highly competent. I was in the middle of a court case when my secretary told me you urgently needed me. I'm on break, but I need to get back in. You're going to need a postponement, not just a break, Liam cut in sharply, and then explained the emergency. Ellison listened in stunned silence as Liam relayed the limited information he had about his unknown son and the kidnapping. Is that all you know? Ellison asked. Yes, and that's all I'm going to know until I hear back from you, Liam reminded him. However, keeping me updated isn't your main priority. This is, Liam said, outlining the financial arrangements he'd made with his Paris banker, Mr. Emmons. Emmons is coordinating everything with the Zen banks, he concluded. I need you to stay in touch with him while I'm on the plane. He'll tell you which banks are providing the cash and where to meet the couriers carrying the money. Find out where Wallace's restaurant is and pick a nearby location for the exchange. The area will likely be filled with cops, so safety shouldn't be an issue. However, try not to attract attention during the exchange or when you arrive at the restaurant. Don't worry about that. Ellison exhaled nervously but remained determined, despite questioning Liam's methods. Why not let the couriers deliver the money to the restaurant? Or better yet, why not have the banks send it in an armored truck? Liam explained tersely, 2 years ago, in Italy, kidnappers saw their ransom arrive in an armored truck and decided there was no need to keep the victim alive. They killed him. After a brief silence, Ellison asked, "Do you want anyone at the restaurant to know you're coming?" "No, I want you to gather information, not give it out. I don't want rehearsed answers and explanations from the cops or anyone else." Liam hung up, but the conversation with Ellison, especially the part about the kidnappers in Italy, made the situation painfully real. Dante, having overheard the entire conversation, began asking Liam questions in an effort to distract him from dwelling on the deadly outcome of that Italian kidnapping. "When I meet my new nephew, what should I call him?" "What? What's your son's name?" He grinned. Liam's thoughts were in such upheaval that he couldn't remember if Neil had mentioned his son's name during their phone call that morning, and even when he tried to recall the conversation, he could remember only the beginning of it with any clarity because Neil hadn't yet dropped his bomb. "Rain has a little boy who was kidnapped this morning in her apartment building. His nanny was left unconscious. Police have issued a crimson alert. Kidnappers are demanding a $1 billion ransom, or else they're going to kill him. They're going to call with instructions at 9 o'clock tonight. Rain called me a few minutes ago. Parker was with her. I talked to him. And then, the bomb dropped. He's your son, Liam." Neil had said more after that, but Liam's brain and his emotions had been going into overload, and although he'd listened, he couldn't remember now what he'd heard. "I don't know his name," Liam replied to Dante's question. "I don't think Neil told me what it is." "What about his mother? How did you meet her?" Dante persisted. "Where was it? Obviously, you two hit it off. What's she like?" "We barely knew each other," Liam said in a cold, sharp tone that warned Dante not to question him further on that subject. "She's just someone I met when I was down in the islands. We had a meaningless fling for a day or two, and then I flew back to Zen and forgot about the whole encounter." That last sentence wasn't entirely true, Liam knew. The embarrassing truth was that he'd missed her terribly, from the time she'd left him standing on the shoreline until the night he ran into her at the banquet and discovered what a shallow, manipulative fraud she was. Before that banquet night, he endured all the humbling doubts and the regrets, the painful longing and bewilderment, of a man who has lost something he desperately wanted and had arrogantly believed was already his. Intellectually, he accepted that when Rain chose to leave the island with her boyfriend, instead of meeting Liam at the shoreline, she had simply been making what she believed was the right choice for her. He understood that, and yet his besotted brain couldn't understand why she hadn't realized that he was the right choice. He knew the only sensible way to deal with the situation was to put it behind him, and that the only way to put it behind him was to stop thinking about her. Forgetting her was the only solution, and yet he persistently subjected himself to the sweet torture of remembering their time together. He, who was extremely adept at compartmentalizing troublesome emotions and barricading truly painful ones, could not, no, would not, put Rain Wallace out of his conscious awareness, where he knew she needed to be. Rain had chosen to be with her boyfriend instead of Liam. He'd lost her to another man, and it hurt like hell. He laid awake at night, trying to figure out why he'd lost her, thinking of ways he might have prevented it. He did that, even after he realized he was acting like a heartbroken, jilted lover, a cliché he'd never imagined could apply to him. All that came to an abrupt end the night he discovered that she was Max Everett's fiancée and he watched her saunter up to him with that coy smile on her face. She was a total fake, and he had fallen for her. In 2 short days, Rain Wallace had managed to discover a weakness in him that he'd never suspected existed. An eager, naive, sentimental gullibility that filled him with self-disgust whenever he thought of his time with her. Shame and self-disgust were the only emotions he still felt in connection with her, and so he chose to avoid any thought of her or mention of her name. Once he realized what she really was, she became easy to get over and completely forgettable, but what he couldn't forget or get over was the fact that he had been a malleable dupe in her hands.